All right, folks, so as you probably heard in the audio of the last footage there, the winds picked up way too bad for us to continue with our fire making efforts. And so we had to abort the rest of the video on that particular day. Now, a few days have gone by and we're back out at the exact same location. The winds have calmed down. It's very calm out today, beautiful day. But we went through all the same protocols, right? We went on the internet. We made sure there was no fire restrictions. Once we got out here, we used our common sense, made sure nothing is super dry. Again, on camera, it may look dry, but I can assure you that it's not. Feel very safe with proceeding on today. So, as discussed, today we are going to do our second fire lay, which is our TP fire lay. But we're going to do it with less resources, less gear. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of come up with a hypothetical scenario here, a wilderness survival scenario. Because I know a lot of folks are going to say, well, Lou, if you're telling us all of the gear that professionals suggest that we take with us, and which is what we did in the last fire lay there, then why are you showing us how to do fire without all that gear? Well, because maybe you did the right thing. Maybe you brought all of the right gear, but something has happened and you are now separated from that gear. You are displaced in some way. Something has happened. We'll just throw out an example there and we'll just say we were in a canoe going down a river and our canoe capsized and most of our gear, maybe not all of it, but most of our gear was in our backpack. And we were able to swim up to the shore. And but our canoe's gone, our backpack is gone. We scoured up and down the shore and maybe all we could find was just a couple little tiny pieces of our gear. So I think that it's important to know that yes, having all the right gear is definitely 100% the right approach when you step into the wilderness. However, things happen, right? Especially in wilderness survival scenarios. Things happen and you could get displaced from your gear. So that's why we're going to show this this particular example. And this fire lay is not specific to having gear or not having gear. It's just simply an example of a fire lay. And again, that's why we're doing this video with 3 of the most popular fire lays, is they all work incredibly well with gear or without gear. Obviously, everybody wants you to have the right gear, but if you come displaced from that gear, these are some techniques that you might be able to use to affect sustainable fire. So let's see here. Also in this scenario, just like the last fire lay where we kind of had a make-believe scenario there, we're going to assume that it has recently rained and everything is soaking wet. And so therefore, just going around and collecting sticks and twigs and things like that to try to make a fire is not going to be an option because everything is going to be too drenched. So therefore, we already know what we're going to have to do, right? We're going to have to go out and find some dead standing, and we're going to have to harvest and start processing some of that material. So in the last fire lay, we had our saw, and that is how we went out and collected that dead standing. However, in this particular fire lay, we are not going to have our saw. So therefore, what are we going to do? Well, as we talked about, we're going to demonstrate a technique called beaver chewing with our knife. I will say, because a couple of days have gone by since we were out here last, I did edit some of that last footage and just kind of generically timed how long it took to harvest that last dead standing with our saw, and it only took 28 seconds. That is why experts suggest that we do have a folding saw with us, because it is so efficient. Now then, the beaver chewing technique is not as efficient, but it is effective. So therefore, once we have that dead standing, what is the next thing that we have to do? Well, we know we're going to have to baton away the outer components of that wood, which are probably wet, in an effort to access the interior components of that wood, which are probably dry. And then we'll have to use our batoning technique to do that, but we'll also have to use our batoning technique to also process that inner material down to smaller pieces for kindling, pencil lead and magic marker size kindling pieces. Now then, as we talked about, we're going to swap out our knife in this example. But I just wanted to point out real quick that in our last fire lay. We utilized this knife right here. This one had, and again, remember, we talked about that in the second video. Experts have certain parameters that they want our knives to fall in. One of those parameters is a knife blade to be between 4 and 6 inches long. This particular knife that we used in the last fire lay is 6 inches long. So that's an example of a maximum size length. And in addition to that, the thickness of that particular blade was 3/16 inch thick. Okay, so experts suggest between 1/8 inch and 3/16 inch. So this one was on the thicker side of the example of a characteristic that they would suggest that we have. So what we're going to do in this fire lay, and again, these particular knives are not specific to fire lays. I just want to show that there's no magic knife out there. Just as long as our knives possess these characteristics, we can still achieve the same goals. So I want you to notice this knife blade is an example of the smaller design characteristics. So this blade is only 4 inches long, and this blade is only a 1/4 inch thick. So it's thinner and it's shorter. So that's an example of the smaller one. I chose the last one in the last fire lay to demonstrate how much easier it can be to use a longer blade knife when batoning, because the tip of the knife sticks out so much further that your baton has the ability to make an impact with the tip of that knife and therefore drive it down through that piece of wood. A shorter knife blade, it's not going to have as much tip protruding out of that wood, and so therefore there's going to be less area for the baton to impact. But it still can be done, and that's why I chose the shortest blade in this particular example, just to demonstrate that the smaller sizes that that experts suggest that our knife possesses will still work in a lot of these techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out of frame because we're not going to be using this knife anymore. Set him off to the side. Put this knife back in the sheath. Okay. Now then, some people may ask, well, Lou, how do you plan on having that knife? Well, the very first thing that you do when you step into the wilderness, or the very first thing that I do when I step into the wilderness, is I strap my knife, or my sheath at very least, immediately onto my side with my belt. My knife is obviously in my sheath, and of course, some experts suggest, and I subscribe to the idea, of having a ferrocerium rod on the side of their sheath. So even if I were to tip over a canoe, capsize a canoe, I am very likely when I make it to shore going to still have all of these resources with me, because they're strapped to my side with a belt. It's very, very difficult to come up with a scenario where I would become separated from this gear right here. Okay, now then, the next thing we did, so also I want you to kind of understand, we're just kind of following through a mental procedure here. So we've now discussed how we're going to harvest some dead standing. We've discussed how we're going to baton away the outer components and the wet components, and process down those inner dry components into kindling size material and probably even some fuel stick size material. And then what's the next thing that we would do? Well, in our last fire lay, we were able to use our lighter and ignite a piece of emergency fire tinder. However, in this scenario, or in this example, we're going to say our fire tinder and our lighter were in our backpack that we've become displaced from. So we now no longer have our lighter nor our emergency fire tinder. So therefore, what is our heat source going to be? Well, obviously in this case, it's going to be our ferrocerium rod. I want to point out that for this example, I brought a brand new ferro rod, and I did that for a reason. That's not by accident. I want to kind of demonstrate something here shortly with the brand new ferro rod. So that's going to be our heat source, but what's going to be our emergency fire tinder? Well, in the third video, we showed some examples there of fire starters. And one, of course, was the man-made one that we showed, which was what we used in our last fire lay. But then we also showed an example that was a natural fire tinder. And as explained in the third video of this series, Depending on where you're at, there's going to be different resources available to you. But the example that we used in the third video of this series, and the example that we're going to use today, is fat wood. That's a natural resource that takes a spark really well and ignites and burns hot, and the flame burns very high. Another reason I want to use fat wood as an example is because pretty much anywhere you have pine trees, which is a lot of areas, at least in North America, as long as you have pine trees, you're going to be able to find fat wood. Now, there's a variety of ways to find fat wood. We're not going to demonstrate all those ways today. There's lots of videos out there for that. So, but we are going to demonstrate a way of finding fat wood. So fat wood's going to be our emergency fire tinder. Our ferro rod's going to be our heat source. Okay. Now then, in the last fire lay, as we discussed, what's one of the first things that we want to do once our fire has been established? Well, we want to char some material. Well, in the last fire lay, we used 100% cotton. We actually took a piece of our shemagh and placed it inside of the tin that was originally housing our emergency fire tinder. But clearly, if we don't have our emergency fire tinder because it was in our backpack, we don't have the tin either. And let's just go ahead and assume that our shemagh was also in our backpack. So now then, what are we going to char? Well, there's lots of natural resources that we can use to create char. And so we're going to demonstrate a couple of those today. But since we don't have our tin, what are we going to use to char? Well, we're going to be using our single wall stainless steel water container. Now, obviously, there's not going to be any water in it, but we're going to utilize that, and we're going to demonstrate how to use that in combination with our nesting cup and how we can char material with that. So in this fire lay, these are all of the resources that we're going to have. We're going to have a sheath, a knife that's on the smaller side of what experts suggest that we carry, a ferro rod, a canteen or a water bottle, but basically a container, single wall stainless steel, and a nesting cup. The rest we're going to have to collect from nature. So before we get started, one thing I recognized too when I was editing that footage is we packed up so fast. Those winds picked up crazy fast, and so we just packed everything up. So we extinguished the fire immediately and packed everything up so fast that I forgot to show you how our char cloth turned out. And by the way, something else I want to point out there that you probably saw, some of these tins are incredibly thin, and you may only get one or two good uses out of them. But that's how our char cloth turned out. Now, obviously, we're going to want to test that. We're not going to do that right this second. And in fact, we're not even going to use this in this fire lay. We'll use it in our third and final fire lay. But I did want to show you how it turned out. And we'll see if we can't use that, like I said, in our final fire lay. But for now, let's go collect some natural materials and see if we can't establish a sustainable fire utilizing the TP fire lay. Thanks. All right, folks, so earlier in the video, I showed you some dead standing, and then I panned the camera over to a little area of some trees that I pointed out that they may look dead, but it may simply be just because the leaves had fallen off. And I told you that I would try to step down there for a few minutes and see if I couldn't show you a good way of being able to tell, is that wood actually dead and standing, or is it alive and standing and it just simply lost its leaves? Okay, so I went over and grabbed a limb here just a second ago. Actually, first, let me grab this one. So if the tree is actually dead, or if the piece of wood that you're looking at is actually dead, when you go to break it, it will break almost immediately. It won't bend very much, and it'll make a really loud snapping sound. Okay, so here's an example of a dead piece of wood here. Hopefully you can hear that. And all I'm really doing is just breaking the little twigs off right this second. But what I really wanted to show you is, and see if you can hear this, but snapped, made a loud snapping sound, very brittle. And I can tell immediately that that is actually dead. Okay, now then, I grabbed an example of a piece that I can clearly tell is alive. Not only does it still have a couple little leaves left on it, but in addition to that, it's got some little tiny buds on there. So I know for a fact that this one is alive. But what I want to show you here is the difference in how the wood acts, and sounds for that matter. So step back over here. Now then, look at how pliable that wood is. And then when it broke, it made a little bit of a snapping sound, but it's very difficult to get apart. And the reason they refer to this as green wood, wood that is not desirable for fire building, is it is literally, the vast majority of the time, it is literally green inside. So it doesn't make that same snapping. Yeah, there's a little bit of a snap, but it's not the same snap, not loud, almost firecrackery type sound. And in addition to that, it is actually downright green. Let's see if I can, as compared to very gray. So this is the dead stuff, which is gray. This is the stuff that is still alive, which is green. Get a little bit closer. Hopefully the camera and the audio will come in clear. Very cracky sound on the dead stuff. Very pliable. Look at that. Look how pliable that is on the living stuff. And very dull sound when it actually breaks. So hopefully that comes through, and hopefully that helps out. So clearly we did step into that area that I had panned over to earlier. And so clearly it all looks as though it could be dead, but that's not the case. There is actually a lot of dead material down here. It kind of surprises me. But there's a lot of living material here too. So what we want to do is look around, see if we can't find a good piece of dead standing, and let's see if we can't demonstrate this beaver chewing technique. Thanks. All right, folks, so we found a piece of dead standing here. This appears to be an old cottonwood tree. It's fairly small. At least it's manageable, especially for what we're trying to do here using the beaver chewing technique. So I'm going to get a couple of these small little twigs out of our way here and begin to demonstrate. So definitely we're going to have a baton. Now I could have just broken something like this off somewhere and used this, but in this example I just took the one that we were using the other day here. It was laying over by our fire ring, so I just picked it up. But clearly you could go around and break something off and use it as a baton if you didn't already have one available to you. So let me get a few of these items out of the way here, some of these little sticks and twigs. Hopefully that audio was picking up on the footage there, where you could hear all of these sticks cracking and coming off, which is clearly indicating that this tree is dead. Okay, all right, so all we're going to do here, let's see if I can't kind of show an angle. So the beginning, a couple of bites into the wood, we're going to do it probably about a 45-degree angle, and the attempt is to cut in just a little bit. Okay, and notice you could probably do this either which way, but I just found this easiest, that I do my 45-degree angle at a downward type stroke. Okay, I'm going to go all the way around the tree doing that type of a stroke, but then once I take a little piece, once I do that initial cut, I'll then come through and turn it at more like a 90-degree angle and go through in an effort like that to remove that little piece that I cut at the 45. Okay, so let's give this a whirl here and see if we can't get this to work. Another thing I want you to notice is I'm standing far away from the edge of this blade. I'm not sitting there trying to do something like this and taking a risk of injuring myself. Okay. don't want the blade to slip away, or somehow I accidentally do something and have that blade come over and make contact with myself. I'm trying to take every precautionary measure I can to avoid that. Okay, I'm probably going to try to fast forward some of this because it does take a little bit of time. Like I said before, it's not as efficient as the saw, but it is effective. So let me get a little bit of this done here. Like I said, I'll probably do some fast forward, or I'll just skip right to it. And then I'll show you what we've accomplished. Okay folks, so hopefully that camera is picking up exactly how much we drastically reduced the diameter or the circumference of that wood. We removed a lot of that material. So now what would have been incredibly challenging initially to break this off, now that we've reduced all that, removed all that material, reduced the diameter or the circumference, now should be pretty easy to break off. Now then, before I do that though, I'm going to try to bring that camera in just a little bit closer and try to get you a better look at this, and then I'll set the camera back up and then we'll see if we can't get this to break off. Okay folks, so as you can see here, we've drastically reduced the amount of material that's there. So now this should snap off relatively easy. Worst case scenario, maybe I've got to take another cut or two out of it, or bite. I guess if we're using a beaver chewing technique, perhaps we should call it a bite. But I'm going to set the camera back up over there, try to break this off, and see if we can't haul it back up to the firing ring so that we can process it a little bit further. All right. Oh yeah. That broke off nice and easy. And quite frankly, it didn't take as long as I thought that it probably would for this particular piece. It's actually a little bit sizable there, but it'll work out perfect for our needs. What we'll do is we'll get back to the, now obviously if this was a real scenario, we would take all of this back to our fire lay and we would be using all of this material. But for this example, really we only probably need just two pieces to baton down the, hypothetically, the wet material and access some of this drier. So we're going to see if we can't do a little bit of batoning here, and I'm not going to film every single piece of batoning on this. We showed that on the last fire lay. Again, the only reason I'm even displaying this is to show that yes, even a 4-inch blade with 1/8-inch steel can still baton. Okay, it's slightly more challenging, but it's not impossible. So same routine as last time. We're just going to try to get rid of that outer layer. And the only reason we're doing this is because, again, hypothetically, in this scenario, it's raining, or it just rained, so everything is wet. That's the only reason we're demonstrating removing the outer layers in an effort to access the inner layers, because the outer layers are probably wet. The inner layers, hopefully, are dry. Now then, clearly, if it were dry outside, we really wouldn't need to go through that additional process right there. This is a little bit of a smaller piece of wood than what we were dealing with the other day, and can you go too small? Well, if you're trying to access dry wood inside the inner cores, then absolutely yes, you could go too small, right? Because maybe the moisture would soak all the way into the inside, and then you haven't really accomplished much. by batoning away the outer layer. So you certainly can go too small. But can you go too big? Well, yeah, you can. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to try to baton a log this big around. You certainly wouldn't want to try to do that. So you want to go with some type of medium-sized type of material. But especially with the shorter blade knife, if you can get away with it, you want to go with a smaller diameter or smaller circumference type of a piece of wood, so that you still have the end of your knife to be able to impact with your baton. So again, not going to make you watch every single bit of this batoning. Just want to show, just want to be able to demonstrate that yes, it can be done with a short knife as well. And in addition to that, it can be done with wood that has been beaver chewed as opposed to have been sawed. Once again, I really, really, really hope that what you're taking away from all of this is that having in your possession all the correct gear that experts suggest that we have is ideal. But again, in this scenario, we just kind of we hypothetically have become separated from our gear. Okay, and so for the most part, there's a knot right there, but we have removed that. I'm going to just toss all that out of the way. We've removed that wet layer, and we've accessed the drier components. Okay, same as before. Now we're going to baton down into smaller and smaller pieces. Try to access pencil lead to magic marker size pieces, or create those size pieces, and then even at the end of all of it, save some fuel size sticks. Something that is 1 inch in diameter and larger. So right there, about the size of your thumb. Oh, it might be just a hair too big, but we'll save it, we'll use it, etc. Okay, let me process down a little bit more of this wood, and then we'll get started with our actual fire lay. And then perhaps we'll take an opportunity to dash out and see if we can't find some fat wood for our emergency fire starter, natural emergency fire starter. And we're also going to see if we can't find some natural material to char. Okay folks, so as discussed, we're going to see if we can't find some fat wood for our fire starter, for our natural emergency fire starter. Now then, fat wood could be found in a lot of places. As we discussed, we're not going to show every single technique for trying to find fat wood. However, when I was walking by this one particular location, I glanced over and saw what I believe, oops, sorry about that, saw what I believe to be fat wood. Now then, it's on a very steep incline here, so I'm going to see what I can do to get the camera set up and try to harvest this. Now, I'm going to attempt to just break it off because I don't even know if it really is fat wood yet. And if I can't break it off, well then I'll probably try to beaver chew into it, or even baton a slice of it off. So let's kind of see what we're up against here. Yeah, this is pretty stout, and it does not appear as though it is fat. Oh, but it sure has that good smell. Sure has that good smell. You know what? I tell you what. Let me go grab my baton really fast and see if I can't baton a piece of this off. This does not appear to be fat wood itself. Fat wood normally has a very amber type of an appearance to it, and this doesn't seem to have that type of an appearance. But it certainly has the aroma. So let me grab that baton really quick, and I'll be right back. Let's see if I can't get a piece of this off of here. I'm not going to try to take out a big chunk at a time. Not looking good, to be honest with you. No, I don't think we're going to be successful on this piece. I think we're going to have to look at some additional pieces here. Okay, yeah, this does have a little bit of fat wood in it. This probably could get us by. It's not a perfect example, so I am going to go ahead and save this. I wanted to break this piece off because I didn't want somebody in the future to come by and fall onto it and get stabbed. I'm going to try to bring that camera just a little bit closer here. Save my baton, save this piece, because what I want to point out to you is that there are rings, very amber colored rings right here. That almost appears as though that could be the type of material that we're looking for. We're just looking for it in a much higher volume. Let me see if I can't get this camera a little bit closer. Sorry. There we go. There we go. Yeah, so see these amber rings right here? That's exactly what we're looking for. We're just really hoping to find a whole piece that's that color. Worst case scenario, we'll try to use this little piece that I shaved off and stashed off to the side, but I'm going to turn off the camera. So another good place to try to find some fat wood is in old pine stumps. And here's a couple right here. What I want to point out is if you look around, where's the rest of the tree, right? Well, what it is this fat wood has a tendency to decay at a much slower rate. So therefore, it's not uncommon that the rest of the tree is decayed and gone, and the fat wood is left behind. So sometimes you can find knots of fat wood just laying on the ground, and sometimes you can find stumps like this that haven't decayed, and therefore there is potentially some fat wood available for us. So I'm going to start with this closer one, see if I can find some. If I don't have any luck, I'm going to go try that one right over there. Okay, let me get this. Okay folks, so hopefully what we're going to be able to display here is that natural resources can be found and utilized. However, hopefully the other thing that we're displaying is that bringing and having available to you the proper resources that experts advise that we have is a much better approach, or is a much easier approach. I shouldn't necessarily say better, but it is certainly a more efficient approach. Okay folks, it almost looks like this little piece of what used to be a root or something here may have some fat wood in it. So, oh yeah. So I'm going to try to shave some of this away. And by the way, I don't plan on leaving these shavings necessarily behind. If I can collect them, I'm going to. But all I'm doing is very similar to the beaver chewing technique. I'm just trying to reduce the diameter of the material in an effort to try to break it off. There we go. Okay, yes, this is a very good piece. So I'm going to bring this closer to the camera. And hopefully you can see that that is very, very amber in color. And no question, that's fat wood. That's what we're looking for right there. Okay, we're going to take this back to the fire ring, and we're also going to collect some of those shavings right there and take those with us as well. Okay, we'll head that direction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to process some of this fat wood. And what we want to do is, same as always, right? We've talked about this a lot of times. You don't want to just throw some type of a heat source to this and hope for the best. What we want to do is we want to try to get it into as small a material as possible. We want to break it down. We want to process it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just gently kind of carve some of this other stuff away, some of this old stuff away, the old bark and things like that. And we're going to see if we can't access the actual fat wood that's inside. And hopefully, let me get this out of the way. Hopefully you can even see that starting to become exposed. You can see what we're trying to access there. Not saying the rest of it wouldn't ignite. I'm just saying this stuff is incredible. And another thing I want to bring up, I think I brought this up in the third video in this series, but fat wood even burns when wet. So it's another reason I wanted to use this example in this fire lay, is because hypothetically it's raining. So now all I've done so far is just remove some of the material that we're not really interested in. It's not ideal material. Okay, so I'm not worried about trying to collect any of that or put it in a pile or anything like that. So there we go. And this will give me something to hold on to here. But if you notice, now that we've gotten rid of some of that other browner material, you can really start to see some of that amber material underneath. And that's exactly what we're looking for right there. Now, don't get me wrong. This is just an example of a small piece that we found. You can find huge chunks of fat wood sometimes. But really, this is certainly all that you would need. As a matter of fact, this would probably get 2 or 3 fires started, even in damp conditions. So this is something that if you have an opportunity and you can go out into the wilderness, obviously do it in a safe fashion, but you can go out and see if you can't find some fat wood on your own, right? Watch some of the videos on all the different ways and places that you can find fat wood. But obviously this little piece of a root at the bottom of a stump was where we found ours. Okay, so now we're going to use the 90-degree spine on the back of our knife, and we're going to try to really make very, very small shavings here and try to collect those, and those will be highly flammable. And then we'll probably take the sharp edge of our knife, and we'll probably go ahead and create some more shavings to maybe put on top of that or add to it if we need to, add some more sustenance to it. If we're fortunate enough to get our spark from our ferrocerium rod to catch these smaller shavings on fire, get those smaller shavings to ignite. So again, not a magic knife. It's just a knife that has a 90-degree spine on it. So let's see if we can't collect using the 90-degree spine on our knife. Let's see if we can't collect some of these shavings. See if we can't create some shavings. I hate doing this on the rock. Really an ideal way of doing this would be over a bandana or a shemagh or your jacket or a t-shirt or something of that nature. But in this scenario, I guess hopefully we would have our shirt or our jacket available to us after we made it to shore from our capsized canoe. You can see that even with just a small amount of processing, we've created a substantial amount of shavings here. Now then, for the purpose of this fire, we're going to go ahead and make some more. What you don't want to do is start off with not enough material, and then, you know, have the flame burn out too quickly or something like that, and you're not able to get your kindling started. So while you're here, you already have the fat wood, you already have the knife, you might as well just go ahead and process down a legitimate size of material. Now, some people suggest at least the size of a quarter. Okay, we might make that much, we might make just a little bit more. Okay, that should be more than adequate there for us. Let me secure our knife. There we go. Okay, so you can see the size of that pile that we've made there. That's a pretty substantial size pile there. So that should take a spark. Now then, and create a flame. Okay, with that being said, once that flame gets going, as we've learned with all small materials, oftentimes it gets consumed by the flame relatively quickly. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and create some shavings. Now, since I'm going to use the sharp side of my knife, I don't want to carve into this stone. So what I'm probably going to do, see if I can't move this stone off to the side. And again, since we're acting as though we have very few resources here, let's see if I can't get that. There we go. I'm just going to use a piece of wood here. We're going to see if we can't create some little curls, some little shavings, just some small stuff, nothing crazy. Nothing super thick. Some of you that are familiar with feather sticks, we're going to demonstrate feather sticks in the next fire lay, but some of you that are familiar with feather sticks may be thinking to yourselves right now, wow, that looks a lot like a feather stick. And you would not be wrong. But for our purposes, what I'm going to do is, if we're fortunate enough to get that smaller dust to catch on fire, I'll then lay these shavings, including this chunk of shavings, on top of that, and then we'll slide it underneath our TP fire lay. So for right this second, I'm going to go ahead, resecure my knife. Gather up some of these shavings. This fat wood smells amazing. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring our stone back in the frame. Hopefully, there we go. And now we have all of these materials together. I've just got this laying right here. And then I think what I might do is go ahead and carve a couple of small, or almost baton, a couple of small pieces of our fat wood. Probably not going to baton it, it's pretty darn small. But I am going to go ahead and try to just create some longer shavings. Wow, there's some really, these are just a little bit thicker, that's all. Okay, all right, resecure the knife. Get those shavings back in our little pile here. Okay, And I think that we're almost ready to ignite, or to create our fire lay and then ignite it, with the exception of we don't have material yet to char. So we're going to address that. Okay, folks, so there's a lot of different natural materials that we can char, but some of the best ones, a couple of the best ones anyway, one of them is cattail. Okay, for any of you that live out east where there's a lot of water, you probably are very, very familiar with cattails. But if you're out west, they're a little bit more challenging to find. And in fact, earlier when we were down collecting some of that dead standing wood just a few moments ago, we were down by a little creek, and I went ahead and wandered around that creek to see if I could find any cattails, but I couldn't find any. So just full disclaimer, I did not find this cattail at this exact location. I found this cattail, normally to find cattails, the water needs to be standing. And I found this cattail probably a couple of weeks ago, not very far from here, a few miles away. But there was some standing water there, there were some cattails there, and I was just out hiking around. I saw them, and I went ahead and collected a couple. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to find some cattails, then you are definitely have a natural material that you're going to be able to char. Now then, for all of you that are familiar with cattails, they can certainly make one heck of a mess, but that fluff is what you're looking for. That fluff is what you're going to, essentially, we're going to char it as a, not as a whole. We'll break it down into like probably, I don't know, 4 pieces, I guess, and we'll char that chunk as a whole, but it's that fluff that makes it so amazingly effective. Okay, so now then, again, if you're out east, these are probably regularly available. If you're out west, they're going to be a little more sparse, a little bit harder to find, but this is a great material to char. Now then, regardless of where you're at, if you're in the wilderness and there is wood available to make fire, then most likely you will also be able to find punkwood. Okay, and punkwood is essentially wood, in this case a tree, that has fallen and is in direct contact with the earth, and it is beginning to decay. Wood that has fully decayed looks a lot more like dust. So that is material that has fully decayed, and that's not something that we're necessarily interested in trying to char. And then obviously, if it hasn't decayed at all, clearly you know exactly what that looks like. However, material wood that is in between those two stages, non-decayed and fully decayed, is called punkwood. And this is a prime example of punkwood here. On the surface, it probably looks like a regular piece of wood. However, I'm going to try to bring this just a little bit closer to the camera. Punkwood is very, very spongy. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to break away some of that more decayed stuff. There you go. It's very, very spongy. So again, if it really was totally raining and stuff like that, this might be a little bit more challenging to be able to find a dry enough piece to try to char, but you would definitely want to try to collect it. Possibly after you make your fire, just kind of keep it close to the fire, see if you can't get it to dry out. And then eventually what you're going to want to do is try to char this as quickly as possible, right? We've talked about that. We want to try to make char as quick as possible because we cannot guarantee that we're going to continue to have all of our resources available to us. And char is something that can help us make fire in the future. Follow-up fires, future fire mentality. Okay, so those are 2 prime examples of material that will make great char. Cattail and punkwood. All right, thanks. Okay, folks, we're ready to start the TP fire lay. So we've got all of our components prepped and ready and right here at our immediate disposal here. And so just like the last fire lay, I'm going to go ahead and remove this stone just temporarily. And the intent is I'm going to place some of this fat wood on this little flat stick right here, And once I get it ignited, I'm going to slide it into the fire leg. Okay, now with that being said, one thing that I do want to kind of point out is last time we stuck a couple of small little sticks right there, a little bit larger than average sticks, but still small, and had our fire, or had our kindling lifted up off the ground. In this teepee fire lay, we're not necessarily going to need to do that. And the reason being, and you're going to see here in just a moment what that reason being is. Now then, this is going to require a couple of sticks and or twigs. Now then, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, hold on here a second. You said we can't use sticks or twigs in this fictitious scenario because it's been raining and everything is wet. Okay, that is true. However, this specific component right here isn't going to matter if the twigs are wet or damp because this is not part of the fuel component. It will eventually dry out and burn, but that's not really the intent of this original initial component here. The intent is for structural. It's a structural component. So, and you're going to see here in just a moment. So what I like to do is make them fairly short. I'm going to show you why. But I like to have at least one that has a fork. Okay, and we're going to show you why. And I'm going to utilize 3 sticks in order to try to accomplish this. Okay. And if you have 2 sticks with a fork in it, that makes it even better. It doesn't even need to be a perfect fork. It just needs to be able to kind of hold some of this together. Okay. Now, when I'm editing this, I'll try to kind of zoom in the camera here a little bit. All we've done is make basically a tripod, and that's the structural component. And I intentionally left the opening of that tripod in a fashion that I'll be able to stick this, hopefully this burning fat wood, up underneath everything when I am done. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, so the reason we wanted to do that is so that we have something to start stacking all of our smaller materials up against. Remember, we want to start with the smaller materials as possible. So what we want to do, and we want to be able to ensure, I'm going to take those off for a minute. We want to be able to ensure that those are going to come in direct contact with our open flame. So we're going to try to even make these just a little bit smaller. As a matter of fact, break these down just a little bit shorter so that they can come in direct contact. And all we are doing is standing the individual components up on end, just as you would envision a teepee, which is where it gets its name. And all I'm doing is just kind of rotating myself around, again trying to find some of the smallest pieces that I have available, and just rotating myself around, standing these sticks on end up against this tripod that we built. And of course, just like a teepee, if we wanted to, we can certainly start putting, and we will be, certainly start putting components, taller components, longer components, and in addition to that, even thicker components. I kind of want to shave this piece down, because I feel like it's got just a little bit too much volume to it. There we go. We secure our knife. Okay. That's all we're doing, is going around in a circle, stacking these components vertically, or at the very least at like a 45-degree angle. Now then, after we get some of those really small components in there, really short ones, now we can start going to ever so slightly larger. I mean, we don't want to get crazy too soon, but they can be a little bit larger and a little bit taller. Nothing really super magic about this, but as always, it does take some preparation, right? It takes some patience for us to make sure that we're getting everything correct, make sure we processed all of our material accordingly, make sure that we have our lay the way we want, make sure we have everything facing exactly the way we want it, make sure that we already have our charred materials or our charring materials available to us, and etc. So same thing, same idea as last time. Just make sure everything is ready, make sure that everything is within your immediate reach, and in this case, again, just going taller and taller, stacking them, leaning them up against each other realistically. Now that we've progressed higher than that initial tripod, that's all we're really doing, is just getting up a little bit taller, a little bit taller, a little bit taller. And the idea here, if you can envision a teepee, the flame from our fat wood, our natural emergency tinder, our natural fire starter, that's going to rise up and go right up through the center there and start to catch all those materials on fire, which is the reason we're progressively getting to larger and larger pieces here. Because eventually we want to be able to start getting some of our larger kindling to catch, and then we're eventually going to be looking to try to get our fuel sticks to catch. Now this one, in my opinion, takes just a little bit more practice than the last one. So this is something you might want to get out next time you're practicing your firecraft. This is definitely one to kind of practice. Not that it's super complicated, it's just that sometimes it does feel as though it takes a little bit of a knack to be able to get all these things stacked in a fashion that they're not just trying to fall over on you. You know, if you pile too much on one side, it'll just start trying to fall over. And that's obviously not what we're looking for here. So I'm probably only going to do a couple more pieces here. Let's do a couple more. And then once it gets lit, and once that flame starts growing, then, of course, then we could add even larger sticks and progressively get bigger and bigger until we have that sustainable fire. I think just for the heck of it, let's see here. I've got a couple of pieces. Why not? So we're going to go ahead and just for this particular exercise here, we're going to go ahead and place a couple of fuel sticks there. Same as last time. We don't want to, I don't want to get too large with this fire because we're not really in a survival situation, and therefore I don't want the flame to burn too long, and then it just becomes cumbersome to try to get everything put out. A little bit set up here as well. So remember, I'm going to have everything at the very end there, and once it's burning, I'm going to slide it right on in there like that. That's the intent. So with that being said, as always, we want the small stuff at the bottom. So here's those really fine fat wood shavings. Really fine fat wood shavings. And then I have at my disposal the little bit larger ones. I'm going to place right here for right this moment. We're going to get some of these other combustibles out of a little bit further away from our fire lay. And then I have a few of these shavings that I've kind of rescued, I guess, if you will, off of the ground. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now that this is kind of set up, I think I'm more apt to bring the camera a little bit closer show you kind of what we've got going on, get you a nice close-up of what we've got going on. I'll put the camera back over there, and then we'll see if we can ignite this thing. All right, folks, so of course my battery is dying. Should have brought an additional battery with me, but I didn't. So there is the fine shavings of fat wood. Here is the little bit heftier shavings of fat wood. There is our TP fire lay, where we intend on inserting the fat wood if we can get it to catch flame, catch our spark and evolve into flame. So this is the generics of it. Okay, then of course, here's our punk wood and our cattail. All right, let me get the camera reset up. All right, folks, unfortunately, we're gonna have to try to go as fast as we can. I was hoping to take just a little bit more time, but that battery is super, super low. So, let me get this stuff out of the way. Paracerium rod. Going to pull it out. Of course, we have it available. It's attached directly to our sheath. That is attached directly to our side. As I explained, I got a brand new one. And the reason I wanted to show you that is because there's an outer coating on the outside of ferro rods when they're brand new. And therefore, when you first strike them, they don't do anything, okay? Don't be discouraged by that. As soon as you get that black stuff off, as you can see, they immediately start throwing sparks. That's why I brought a brand new one. Okay, let's see if we can get this fat wood to start for us. Okay, I have to set this down right this second. Here's some of that larger, chunkier stuff. That I just kind of lost. There we go. That's all right. We're going to insert that right into our fire lay. Hopefully the battery's still going, and you can see just exactly how well fat wood burns. Okay, and then let me resecure the ferro rod. Again, I have no idea if the battery's still working or not, so if it's not, I'll have to show you how to make the char at a later time. Okay, let's get all this stuff away from the fire. Okay, folks, hopefully the battery lasted long enough to catch all that. TP fire lay. Very similar to the log cabin fire lay as far as the concept is concerned. The construction itself, sure, completely different, but the concept exactly the same. And hopefully we've displayed that you can find natural resources if you were displaced from the resources that you brought with you.